So here are 6 philosophers who weren't philosophers. Very quickly, it's Newton, Einstein, Freud, Kurt Gödel, Alan Turing, B.F. Skinner. All very important thinkers, all very challenging thinkers, but the most important philosopher who isn't a philosopher is, of course, Darwin. Now, coming from me, people say, yes, but you're so enamored of Darwin that you even, I don't know, try to mimic him in some ways. Now, I don't know why anybody would say that, but it is true that I take him as a model in everything that I do. Darwin's great idea, it seems just absurd at first. My favorite quote comes from one of the earliest critics of Darwin, and what he said echoes today just perfectly. This is Robert Beverly Mackenzie, and I will just take a minute to read this because this is a wonderful quotation from 1868. In the theory with which we have to deal, absolute ignorance is the artificer, so that we may enunciate as the fundamental principle of the whole system that in order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. This proposition will be found on careful examination to express in condensed form the essential purport of the theory, and to express in a few words all Mr. Darwin's meaning, who, by a strange inversion of reasoning, seems to think absolute ignorance fully qualified to take the place of absolute wisdom in all the achievements of creative skill. Exactly. That's it. That is Darwin's idea, and it is a strange inversion of reasoning. It's initially very counterintuitive. We were speaking earlier of Pievani's battle against the rhetoric of ID. Well, here's an example of intelligent design rhetoric. This is actually about 30 years old, this particular. It comes from a little pamphlet, a propaganda pamphlet. Do you know of any building that didn't have a builder? Yes, no. Do you know of any painting that didn't have a painter? Do you know of any car that didn't have a maker? If you answered yes for any of the above, give details. Take that, you Darwinians. The idea that you couldn't have an elegant creation without an intelligent creator is so strange that just expressing it like this is enough to turn people against Darwin's idea. So it's an uphill struggle for us to comprehend the idea and to spread it to others. Now, some of you may be able to see I'm wearing a little pin that has this Darwin fish on it. And it's as you can see, it's evolving. One day I was wearing this at a meeting, and the physicist Murray Gell-Mann came up to me and he said, "Oh, Dan, you have a Darwin pin on. You know, of course, that this fish, the Christian symbol, that this was the first acronym. That here it is, it's ichthys, the Greek word for fish. And this, of course, whoa, this laptop translates the Greek into other symbols, excuse me. And on my laptop, it comes out in Greek on the left. Ichthys comes out Jesus Christ, God, Son, Savior. Murray Gell-Mann said, all right, I want to know what DARWIN stands for. I said, that's a good question. I'll work on it. And I recalled my Latin from high school, and it took me about an hour. And I came up with this. I'm quite happy with this. Delere auctorem rerum ut universum infinitum noscas. Destroy the author of things in order to understand the infinite universe. Because that's what Darwin's idea does. It gets rid of the author of things and replaces it with an understanding of how physical processes could create all that wonderfulness. In the process, Darwin's idea undercuts the best argument that anybody has ever put for the existence of God, the argument from design. But that's not the theme of my book. The theme of my book is that Darwinian thinking also provides an explanation of religion as a natural phenomenon. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Why, people ask, why do you want to break the spell? Why do you want to study religion as a natural phenomenon? And the answer is simple. Religion is a very important natural phenomenon, as important as the world economy, as global warming, as poverty, as energy. And it deserves to be studied because we want to know where it's going. We want to plan ahead. That's what our brains are for producing future, for anticipating. What's going to happen in religion in the next 50 years? Religions are changing very fast. I give you 5 scenarios. You tell me which one you think is going to be closest to the truth. 1, the Enlightenment is over and religion is going to sweep the planet. That's hypothesis 1. Well, here's a map of the world's religions, and I wonder which religion will sweep the planet if one doesn't. Think of the turmoil that will be caused if that happens. This is the rough breakdown of religious adherents around the world today. You'll notice, by the way, that the non-religious and Hinduism and Islam are all on about a par. A fact that many people, especially in the United States, do not know is that the fastest growing group in the world is the non-religious. Faster than Islam. An interesting fact. But there's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is that religion is in its death throes. Maybe in the lives of our grandchildren, it will simply go extinct. Maybe in 50 years, this will be the European Museum of Roman Catholicism. Maybe in 50 years, this will be Disney's Magic Kingdom of Allah. These are unlikely, hilarious ideas, but you have to remember the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, it started as a church, then it was a mosque, and today it's a museum. So it's not impossible. But that's just one hypothesis. Another one is maybe religions will transform themselves into sort of moral teams without the doctrine, without the creeds. Maybe it'll be just with a lot of pageantry and a lot of good works. Or maybe religion will diminish in prestige and visibility, rather like smoking, so that, yes, if you must smoke, go ahead, but don't blow your smoke in our face, please. It's possible that maybe religion will come to be viewed as a tolerable eccentricity that some people insist on maintaining. Not really good for their health, but not so bad. And then there's another possibility, and this is actually believed in very strongly by actually millions of my fellow Americans, and that is that Judgment Day is going to come, and that Armageddon will happen, and the blessed will be carried up into heaven bodily. Yes, these are all all but one of these, at most, is wildly wrong. And I don't know which one you think is right, but you don't know. Nobody knows. I don't know. And I think that's why we need to study religion carefully, because we need to know. It's important to understand the phenomena so that we can anticipate the future of those phenomena. Now, is my water up there still, or did I bring it down? I guess this is it. Yeah. Imagine that Martian scientists came to Earth what would they see? Well, Paul McCready gives us one beautiful vision of this. He points out that 10,000 years ago, that's not long in biological terms, the human population, we were a minor primate 10,000 years ago. The human population, plus their livestock, this was after the birth of agriculture, plus their pets, this was approximately 0.1% of the terrestrial vertebrate biomass. What do you suppose that percentage is today? Anybody hazard a guess? 1%. 5, 10. The answer is 98. We outweigh the elephants and the giraffes. And now most of that is cattle, actually. Cattle and sheep and so forth. It's our domesticated animals, which outweigh us. But put it all together, human beings and their domesticated animals now make up 98% of the vertebrate biomass. McCready says something stunning about this. He says, over billions of years on a unique sphere, chance has painted a thin covering of life, complex, improbable, wonderful, and fragile. Suddenly, we humans, a recently arrived species, no longer subject to the checks and balance inherent in nature, have grown in population, technology, and intelligence to a position of terrible power. We now wield the paintbrush. We are now responsible for that thin paint that covers our sphere. And the single explanation of how this one primate species accomplished this is that we evolved language and culture, and we used that to magnify our powers many orders of magnitude. And one of the chief ingredients in that amazing development was religion. Played a major role. We need to understand that role. So our Martians, they arrive at the Earth, and when they arrive, this is what they see. Now, what do you think this is? Is this a whale? Is this a tongue? Is this some bacteria in a petri dish? No, this is approximately 1 million human beings gathered for Kumbh Mela in northern India on the banks of the Ganges River. One of the largest convocations of bipedal vertebrates in the history of the planet. This would impress the Martians. This is a fantastic biological phenomenon. What explains it? Here's another one. And here's another one. These are amazing. They are expensive. They are dramatic. These are such extraordinary biological events that we need to know what forces have conspired to bring these events into existence. And the Martian scientists would be very eager to figure this out. That's part of understanding religion as a natural phenomenon. How did it originate? What is it for? How does it perpetuate itself? Let me go back to the question of what it's for. When I first started working on my book, and I told people that I was working on the evolution of religion, I often got this reaction. They say, oh, yes, well, I've always wondered exactly what religion was for. It's got to be for something. Because every human group that has ever been studied has some kind of religion. So it's got to be good for something. What is it good for? And I said, well, you may be right. But every human group that's ever been studied also has the common cold. What is it good for? And the answer, of course, is the common cold is good for itself. It replicates because it can. It is a parasite. It lives off human hosts and is hard to eradicate. its ubiquity in human cultures, in human societies, is no guarantee that it is good for them. We need to bear this in mind. Religion may be good for us, or it may not be. That is an empirical question, and we mustn't prejudge the answer by assuming from the outset that the omnipresence of religion is a clear guarantee that it is beneficial to those who adopt it and endorse it. That is a subject for empirical inquiry. Now here's a cow, not a sacred cow, but a very nice cow. Who designed the cow? Tough question. Well, human beings, cattle breeders, have redesigned the cow a great deal, but its ancestor, the aurochs, was designed by unaided natural selection. And what were aurochs for? Aurochs were for making more aurochs. They were just a wild species. They weren't for anybody but themselves. But they became domesticated, and then human beings reverse engineered them and figured out which features of these wild species they should enhance or eliminate or revise or modulate until they had the perfect mechanism for human purposes, building on that wild foundation. The theme of my book is that the same thing happened with religions. That religions have an evolutionary history, that they are brilliantly designed products. Milk cows are brilliantly designed too. They have an evolutionary history. There have, in fact, been at least hundreds of thousands of religions in the history of religion, which is a fairly recent phenomenon, biologically speaking. Certainly less than 100,000 years old. In that time, we may have had 1 million religions. Only a few have survived. Religions are born every day. There is a website on new sects. It cannot keep up with the new sects that are created. Most of them, like most lineages, go extinct within days, weeks, months, a few years. A few last longer, some last several thousand years, and counting. So what we have to do if we want to understand the future of religion is we have to reverse engineer religions. We have to see how they work, why they work, how they're designed, and we have to understand that they are designed by evolutionary processes, including the evolutionary processes of their hosts, human beings, because modern religions are the domesticated descendants of early wild religions. Well, the Martians might look out and see an ant climbing up a blade of grass. You might see this, you might wonder what the ant is doing. It climbs up the blade of grass, and it climbs until it reaches the very top. If it falls, it climbs again and again, like Sisyphus rolling his rock. Why is the ant doing this? What benefit accrues to the ant from all of this expenditure of energy? Is it showing off to mates? Is it hunting for food? Is it lost? And the answer is that this is the wrong question to ask, because no benefit accrues to the ant at all. Is it just a fluke then? Yes, it is just a fluke. It's a Lancet Fluke. It is a tiny brain worm that needs to get into the belly of a sheep or a cow in order to reproduce. So it climbs into the brain of a passing ant and takes over the nervous system and drives the ant up the blade of grass, where it's more likely to be eaten by a sheep or a cow. It's the fitness of the Lancet Fluke, not the ant, that is being enabled, enhanced by this energy. There's many cases of this. This is a stickleback fish, the three-spined stickleback. There is a parasite known as Schistocephalus solidus, a little worm, which gets in the stickleback and changes its shape, makes it so it floats up near the top, where it can be easily caught by a bird, because Schistocephalus solidus has to get into the belly of a bird to complete its life cycle. Then there's Toxoplasma gondii, which is carried by mice, and it has to get into the belly of a cat. Well, what would you do if you were in the belly of a mouse and you were in the body of a mouse and wanted to get into the belly of a cat? You would turn the mouse into Mighty Mouse. You make the mouse extra bold, so it's completely fearless. It runs in the open where it is more likely to be eaten by a cat. These are just a few amazing true stories. In every case here we have a hijacker, a parasite that infects the brain and induces suicidal behavior on the part of the host on behalf of a cause other than one's own genetic fitness. That's a scary idea. I wonder, does it ever happen to us? Well, we should remember that the Arabic word Islam means submission, surrender of self-interest to the will of Allah. But this is also a theme in Christianity. This is a page of music that I found in a Paris bookstall 50 years ago. It dates from mid-16th century. And it says, Semen est verbum Dei satur autem Christus. The word of God is a seed, and the sower of the seed is Christ. The idea that human beings cede their authority to the Word and let the Word be their guide, and they are prepared to give their life, if necessary, to spread this Word. This is a very familiar theme in Christianity. Surrendered people obey God's Word even if it doesn't make sense. You've certainly heard that idea before. In this case, this is from Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. This book has sold over 23 million copies and is being translated all over the world. Now, there are many ideas to die for. Islam, of course, Christianity, communism. Many people have died for communism and killed for communism. Democracy, many people have given their lives for democracy, for justice, for freedom. This is one of the most amazing things about our species. No other species does anything like it. This is the license plate of the state of New Hampshire, just north of Massachusetts. Live free or die. It's very important to recognize that the moose cannot entertain that proposition. The moose can't endorse it or reject it. Only human beings can decide to live by such a motto. This is one of the most amazing and spectacular differences between us and all other species. I'm a grandfather. How many of you are grandparents? How many are parents? How many would like to be parents or grandparents if they're not already at some point in their lives? Well, but how many of you think, I love my grandchildren? How many of you think that this is the most important thing in life, is having more grandchildren than anybody else? Not a one of you raise your hand. But we're the only species that doesn't think that. And in fact, all other species, their summum bonum is genetic fitness. They can't think, oh, never mind, I'd rather study French, or I'd rather be a priest, or be a paleontologist. They cannot even conceive of having an idea to die for, but we can, and that is one of the sources of our strength. Maximizing your progeny is not the summum bonum of your life. And it's because ideas, not worms, hijack our brains. And we become their willing servants. These are ideas that replicate. We make copies of them and we pass them on. These are what Dawkins calls memes. They're analogous to genes or to viruses. Now, a lot of people have trouble with this idea. I'm not going to try to sell you all on the idea of memes right now. There's plenty in my books that deal with this. A virus doesn't have a mind. It's just a string of nucleic acid with attitude. That is to say, it has no reproductive machinery of its own, but it has this wonderful feature that if it gets into a cell, it commandeers that cell's copy machine and makes more copies of itself. Similarly, ideas get into human brains and get those brains to make more copies of them and spread them. A theologian says if survival of the fittest has any validity as a slogan, then the Bible seems a fair candidate for the accolade of the fittest of texts. In what sense fittest? In the sense that there are more copies of Bibles around the world than any other text. It has out-replicated all the competition. Even Rick Warren's book, which has only sold 23 million copies. If we adopt this Martian perspective and look at Homo sapiens and its culture, we recognize that human culture is itself one of the fruits on the tree of life. Here's the tree of life. It doesn't look much like a tree because this is a bird's eye view of a tree. You're looking down on it from on the top. In the center, we see the root, and right there at the heart of the center is the last universal common ancestor. And the artist, the scientist who drew this diagram, put 3 species out on one limb. That's the eukaryotic limb. We're eukaryotes. You see us there, Homo. He's put Coprinus and Zea, 2 other closely related species, on the neighboring branches. So what are they? Well, Coprinus, those are mushrooms, and Zea, that's corn. Yes, they are our cousins on the tree of life, much more closely related to us than most of the other living things on the planet. Beaver dams and Hoover Dam are both fruits on the tree of life. They are artifacts made by mammals, Castor in one case and Homo sapiens in the other. Spider webs and the World Wide Web, or an energy web, these are also fruits on the tree of life. A bird's nest and an ode to a nightingale, a poem. These are also artifacts created by organisms that have evolved. And even human culture gets underway without any insightful design to prime the pump. I'm going to skip over a few slides here. Yes. Here's a riddle. How are spoken words and folk songs like squirrels, rats, pigeons, and barn swallows? And the answer is that they're wild, not domesticated. They have evolved to live well with human beings, but they're not domesticated. Not even spoken words. Written words are domesticated. Spoken words, they don't require human stewards. They don't require human owners. They're designed by evolution to thrive in human company, but they are not domesticated. But now let's look at domestication. How clever of sheep to acquire shepherds. What a benefit they got. They could outsource all their problems. Protection from predators, food finding, health maintenance. And the only cost was a loss of free mating. Was this a good move for sheep? Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of millions, maybe billions of sheep in the world today. Their nearest wild relatives you could carry off in a couple of arcs. So there was a tremendous fitness boost to becoming domesticated for that lineage. But of course it wasn't the sheep's cleverness. Sheep, as you know, are pretty stupid. It was a smart move, but it wasn't their smart move. It was Mother Nature's smart move. Francis Crick once made a joke about what he called Orgel's second rule. Evolution is cleverer than you are. Earlier, Professor Boncinelli was speaking about what Mother Nature cares about. It's all right to talk this way. It's all right to talk about Mother Nature being clever and not noticing this and discovering this or that. Mother Nature has no purposes, no foresight, but comes up with brilliant designs. The designs found in nature are nothing short of brilliant, but the process of design that generates them is utterly lacking in intelligence. That's the original Darwinian message. Some people don't understand this. This is Cardinal Schönborn writing in the New York Times, and I gather his piece was also reprinted in Corriere della Sera. The Catholic Church, while leaving to science many details about the history of life on Earth, proclaims that by the light of reason, the human intellect can readily and clearly discern purpose and design in the natural world, including the world of living things. Yes. The products of natural selection exhibit purpose and design exquisitely, but the process that created them was without purpose or design. Now, what I want to say about religion is that religion, like sheep, that the wild memes of religion got themselves domesticated. And they weren't smart. They were no smarter than sheep or viruses. It was just the brilliance of Mother Nature. The wild memes of religion acquired stewards, shepherds, if you like, who were prepared to devote their lives to their flourishing. Now you consider, in the realm of ideas, the difference between an idea like long division or calculus. Calculus, not a particularly catchy idea. I don't know about you, but I don't find myself walking down the street thinking about second derivatives, doing calculus problems in my head. If you want calculus to survive and flourish, you have to have teachers who devote themselves to spreading and maintaining and keeping the species going. Whereas some songs, some ideas are naturally infectious. And organized religions descended from folk religions, which were wild. When we became the conscious, deliberate stewards of our ideas, this changed everything. I think I'm going to leap ahead now. I'm going to skip over some of this. What did it change? Well, there are many features of organized religions which are unknown to wild religions. One of them is, don't blame God, but thank God for all the good things. This is when the tsunami happened, when Katrina happened, on every side you had people coming forward, even people who weren't religious, saying, well, don't blame God for this. Don't blame God. Don't blame God. God is not responsible for these terrible tragedies. But whenever anything good happens, we thank God. This one-way valve, God gets the credit for the good things and doesn't get the blame for the bad things, is a very recent religious idea. In wild religions, in the primitive tribal religions, gods get blamed all the time. They are often bitterly denounced by those who believe in them for bringing calamity on the group. This is a new idea, and one can understand what its rationale is. Here's another one. Surrendered people obey God's word even if it doesn't make sense. This is a brilliant protective coating around a religious idea. It deflects criticism. It says, it is a virtue not to try to understand these ideas. It is a virtue to ignore criticism. It is a vice to favor criticism. Another particularly clever one is this one. Don't ever try to argue with the devil. He's better at arguing than you are, having had thousands of years to practice. In other words, and I am bedeviled by this all the time, people who say, if you meet somebody who's reasonable, affable, open-minded, but curious and eager to talk about the possible flaws in some of your thinking about religion, do not talk with this person because that's the devil. The more rational and reasonable this person sounds, the more dangerous and ultimately satanic the person is. It's a very clever defense mechanism. I don't think anybody invented it any more than anybody invented the word cat. These things just evolved, and they do a very good job. That, by the way, was another quote from Warren's book. It's a lovely wild card for disarming any reasonable criticism. And then one more, and then I'm through. The idea that belief in God is a requirement of morality. This idea is, I think, the most ubiquitous and the most pernicious falsehood spread by religion. It is simply false, but it is very commonly heard. I took a picture of this sign out in front of a church in rural Maine. Good without God becomes zero. This sort of clever little bit of word arithmetic here. It's just false. But as several of the speakers before said, it's very important that we show people how ethics, how values can be founded on something other than religious creed, how we can understand the evolution, the social and cultural evolution of morality, and use that as our benchmark, our touchstone of goodness. We do not have to rely on religion as our source and as our anchoring for morality. So in conclusion, let me just say, religion are powerful forces in people's lives. They're brilliantly designed. And when we understand their design, we can better see what we might do or should do to revise their design, to improve them. In the meantime, I have just one policy proposal. This is very important in the United States, and I think perhaps in Italy too. Education on world religions for all of our children in public and private school and in homeschooling. We already have the 3 R's, as we say, reading, writing, and arithmetic. We should add religion and have factual information on the world's religions that is part of the education of every young person. History, creed, rituals, music, symbols, ethical commands, and prohibitions. No value judgments, just facts. Why do I think this is a good idea? And by the way, I say, as long as you teach them this, you may teach your children whatever else you want. But you have to teach them that. Because toxic religions depend on the enforced ignorance of the young. Everywhere we look, in every large religious creed, there is toxic versions of it. There are pathological, dangerous versions of those religions. They all depend on keeping the young ignorant. A religion that can flourish in a world of mutual knowledge of the facts about world religions is, I think, a benign religion. And since I do think that religions have a lot to do to help a lot of people, we ought to try to encourage the evolution of the benign forms of religion, not the toxic forms. It's a public health message that I have here, really. We shouldn't try to eliminate all of our symbionts. We couldn't live without the flora in our digestive system. Most of the viruses and bacteria and microbes that live in us are harmless or even beneficial. What we want to do is to create the conditions where the ones that are truly dangerous and damaging gently extinguish themselves, leaving the good behind. Thank you very much for your attention.